Hi there.
It's great to meet you and great to be with you here today.
I'm delighted to be here. This is one of my favorite topics, so I can't wait.
I'm very excited too. I think this is a really interesting and important topic to get into. So let's get into it. Can you tell me a little bit about your organization, Plan It Forward, and how that got started, why you started it?
Sure. Well, just for background, first of all, welcome everybody. If you're not from Washington, welcome to Washington. If you're not from GW, welcome to GW. I echo John Locke's comments that we're delighted to host this conversation. So I'm a recovering journalist. So I've been in many places over my career, and I've studied actually and I've reported on and done a lot of things relating to cities and urban life and urban decay and urban renewal and reinvention and the incredible dynamic and evolution that constitutes urban life. When I came to GW, I started this project called Plan It Forward. It's a multimedia platform, mostly for student publication, to look at the ideas and innovations that would move the planet forward. And the key areas where we sort of invite people to explore and do their storytelling is, one of them anyway, is in the built environment. So we have a ton of interest and a ton of students who want to engage what is happening in our cities, in this city and other cities. So we have stories on electric buses and bike lanes and green building and green roofs and retrofitted buildings with argon gas between the panes of glass, because it is so huge and yet so granular at the same time.
It seems like such a great way to get students who are interested in journalism also interested in these other topics and giving them an opportunity.
It is, except one of the things that we talk about with this project is that this is not just for journalism or filmmaking students. That what our message to people is, whatever you do in life, if you're a business leader, an activist, an advocate, a scientist, certainly a communicator, an engineer, you will be more effective if you are a good communicator. And a good communicator is a good storyteller. Mm-hmm. I was up on this stage not too many years ago with 4 mayors from 4 big cities. And I asked them, how do you talk about sustainability and these things you need to do in your communities with your lower income residents, who are mostly concerned with putting food on the table and the jobs they have and the well-being and safety of their kids? And they said, to a person, we don't actually use the term sustainability. We will talk about coming and doing an energy audit on your home to help you save money. We will talk about planting trees along your streets to make them cooler when it's hot and the sun is shining. So the idea of communication and storytelling and crafting narratives around real people who live real lives to make these issues come to life is really what this is all about, and what I think is so important.
So can you talk a little bit more about that, the role that storytelling and media plays when it comes to the clean transition, clean energy, clean future?
Sure. Well, as I like to say, I'm from the media and I'm here to help, which nobody ever believes, and you shouldn't. Look, I think that we talk a lot. The School of Media and Public Affairs, with which I'm associated here, has 2 sides to it. One is journalism and mass communication, journalism, which is where I am, and the other is political communication. In political communication, we talk a lot about framing. How are issues framed? Agenda setting. How's an agenda set? If you look at a lot of the media, a lot of the narrative around cities and around, our urban life and sustainability, there's a lot of doom and gloom, and there's a lot of, we're not going to be able to afford it, and now we've got office vacancies and businesses are going bust, and what's going to happen to center cities and all this other kind of stuff. What we try to focus on, the framing that we've got, and the message that I think is so important to get out there is a tremendous amount of intellect and creativity and invention and innovation that's going on. Cities are, we're not ancient Rome, right? We're not walking around in togas carrying stone tablets. Sometimes it feels that way with this thing, but never mind. And so I think capturing that dynamic and that excitement and the idea of forward progress is a very important way to frame this. We talk a lot, especially with my students and young people these days, about eco-anxiety. Climate change is we're losing, we're doomed to this. But it's when you actually look at some of these things that are taking place and that are being brought to bear in our cities that there's a certain sense of hope. So I think to your question about why is media, why is this communication so important, obviously this is where we learn who the leaders are. This is where we can see where best practices are. But it's also something that can generate excitement and interest, not just doomsaying and sort of the bad news.
Yeah, so expanding on that a little bit, how do you keep your story so positive, and how do you actually break through, the noise and all the negativity that you see a lot in other types of news and media sites?
Well, it's hard to break through the negativity because that's the other thing I say to people is, how many people in the room have a child? Anybody got kids? Okay, your kid comes home with a report card with 4 A's and 1 D. What do you ask about first? Okay, that's the news, right? We say the plane that crashes, not the plane that lands, is the news. So the negativity goes with the territory, and it's human nature to a certain extent. So we're not going to keep it positive, but what we can do is we can say there's this other side of things. And this other side of things are these areas of astonishing invention and creation, right? I have an electric vehicle. I am watching this personally and closely. And I have an electric vehicle because I believe in the technology, and I think it's transformational, and I really think it's going to be one of the big next things. A few years ago, I went out to the National Renewable Energy Lab, and I hung out with guys who are doing, and women who are doing battery, breakthrough battery technology and building solar trees. Imagine if we could have something to plug into. It's not a parking meter, but you actually are going to be recharging your car. Now, we're a long way from that, or hydrogen technology, all of these things. But when people learn about this stuff, it's dynamic and it's fascinating. It's new. And I think that's the importance I like John's engineering and. It's the and stuff that often gets dropped. And so how can we bring the and in all of these conversations into context? I had one last point and I'll shut up, but I had this student. I invited my students last semester to write about where they came from, do a personal narrative, tying it to how climate change was affecting their home or where they were from, and what their communities or cities were doing in response. One young woman wrote a story about Shanghai, which is where she was from. She started it by writing about her grandma and what her grandma told them and what the stories she relayed over tea. She closed the story by wondering what Shanghai would look like when she was a grandma, a young woman writing the story, in the year 2050. I'm not sure her math works out quite right there, but okay. When Shanghai's population will approach 50 million people.
Wow.
50, and Beijing, 50 million people. We think New York or LA are crowded, right? So I think there's the idea of captivating and capturing these ideas and stories and conveying them so that people understand what we're facing and what we're up against is very important to making sure that people have a full view of what's out there.
So if you were going to set up a City of the Future desk, how would you organize that?
So this is a great question. So I was at CNN for many, many years. I was a Washington bureau chief there, and one of the things that I enjoyed the most is what we called our futures meetings. So we would have our futures meetings, and we would say, okay, well, 2 months from now is National Widget Day. What are we going to put in, So I've been thinking about this. I think, what if you set up, and some news organizations actually have sort of a city desk, but the city desk is like covering education and crime and stuff like that. But what if you set up a desk to cover, and you could actually do it, the shape, the change, the dynamic of the city? There'd be a technology part of that, right? How are we going to, accommodate autonomous vehicles when they're running around and people own cars differently? There would be an architecture component of that. What does the new architecture look like? And how quickly can we retrofit buildings? There would be a consumer desk. How do we tie these things to people so that they have in their own self-interests both an understanding and an interest in whether it's solar panels or the way they live, commute, purchase, recycle, compost, any of those things that will make our cities more efficient, safer, more livable, and more inclusive. I actually think a future city desk would be a very cool thing to do with an endless trove of stories because of what you're going to be examining some of those over the next several days because, and this is what makes it so great, A, they're already happening. B, they're not yet done. We don't know whether a lot of these things are going to succeed. So there's that tension, there's that creative tension that you have at the heart of any good story, right?
So how do you convince a media organization to let you set up a City of the Future desk?
That's a really good question. I think you actually can, if I can be crass about it, you convince them that it's in their best interest, and maybe it's even profitable. So the two things to actually creating a desk and creating kind of a critical mass in the media context is there needs to be audience interest, and you need to be able to pay for it. So to me, there's audience interest. When I write my bill every month, I live in the District of Columbia, my water bill is unbelievably high. It's outrageous. It's outrageous because we are paying to upgrade a century-old infrastructure that just isn't adequate anymore. Now, I don't like paying this bill at all, and I don't think the city does a very good job at explaining to me why I'm paying this much money. So thinking about, all right, how do we tie all these many issues? Transportation. District of Columbia has electric buses. They cost nearly twice what a diesel bus costs. Why is that in our interest? Well, when you actually unpack it, that electric bus over its lifespan, and we're testing it now, will be cheaper than cleaner, cheaper, and better to operate. Explaining these things and bringing them to people so it's interesting, that's the first thing. And the second thing is, like I said, trying to pay for it. I suspect that there are businesses that would want to pay for that coverage because they would want to bring those ideas to the general public. That would be one way to do it.
I think that's a really good point about making it personal to people. Because one thing I've noticed in Texas after we had the winter storms 2 years ago now, bills are going up a lot, and people, just like my normal friends that are not interested in the energy industry, talk a lot about utility bills and ERCOT, and so it's applicable to them. It's something they're seeing every day. So
I want to plan that, because for those in the audience and for those who will be coming as you think this through, it's very important. And the first rule is know your audience, right? It's very important to know your audience and how we make these issues relevant to people. That's my life, my kid, my drive, my home, my office, all those things. Not to be selfish about it. It's not about that. It's about just being able to relate to it. And that's one of the most challenging things, because some of these are out there ideas or technologies that may not relate to somebody right now. It's not easy to say how energy recapture, something that a colleague of ours is working on, is really going to relate to people. I've worked on that with her, and I think she's brilliant, and I like her a lot. But all right, so what does this mean? Translate this. And maybe those are the words, translate this.
So switching gears a little bit, you work with students and young people, and so now we have Generation Z coming up, and I wonder if you see any differences in the way that Gen Z approaches climate leadership compared to other generations in the past, like millennials, or any major similarities?
Well, I'm a proud baby boomer, so I'm happy to operate Jurassic Park for anybody here who's interested. I think we see some very interesting. I have 3 millennial kids. All of them are city people. Two of them made a determined effort to stay downtown. They're not interested in being in the burb. God, they're not interested in being in the burbs. But they're not. This is where they relate. They want to walk. They want accessible and diverse communities around them, and it's stunning. That's one thing. The other thing is, and I see this with my students, and I have a little video we can roll in if you'd like at some point. They're very tuned in to the world around them. They're very tuned in to the world around them. So one of the things and this, I hate this term, but it kind of works, this notion of intersectionality. It's actually how they think. They may not use the word, and maybe they do. So for example, the students who post these stories, the students I work with, are very interested in how equity and social justice translate through their urban environment. That's schools, I was just listening to a student pitch a story idea about the role that transportation plays in social justice. Tremendous interest in food. And so do you have the video?
I believe we do. Can we play Frank's video?
So this video, hang on just if you can pause it for a second here. So this is a video that was, I don't know why CNN is at the bottom of that one. Oh well. It was not done by CNN. It was done by a student, a GW student, a few years ago, who was very interested in urban agriculture. A lot of interest in food deserts and the access that people have to good, healthy, affordable food in their communities. So if you roll this for just 30 seconds, you can see what someone's done. Okay, thanks. So what I like about this, and one of the reasons I wanted to share this with you, is this is a student who, through using some video that was available elsewhere, her own research, which is what is represented in the text that she put up, using maps and graphs and graphics, the media that people can use, can really tell a pretty interesting and fulsome story. But the level of interest in this and related issues is striking. And I think one of the things that's most exciting to me is, as we see in our students today, and I don't know, John, if you agree, is a very connected sense of themselves to place, a very important sense of the moment because of climate change and some of the other things that we know are out there. And so I think there's an opportunity here to really capitalize on that intellect and creativity in a very exciting way.
Yeah, we at Z Prime have several Gen Z employees, and they're super passionate, and it's fun working with them.
Well, the research shows too that, at least for the moment, Gen Z and younger employees want to be part of something that they feel has a social connection, that they're making a contribution, and that they're addressing some of these issues in their work that they hear about and that are so pressing around them.
So is there one story in particular, a recent story that stands out to you as particularly inspiring?
Well, there are a lot. Let me start with a story that I'm not going to call it inspiring, but I think is probably the biggest story that we're in this context that just fascinates me. A few years ago on this stage, we had some architects here, and they were talking about how they were adapting to change that they were seeing at the time. This is pre-COVID. One of the architects said, "We're rethinking office space." And he said, "Let me give you an example. Law firms, they don't need law libraries anymore. They don't need these gigantic, huge rooms that can carry all this weight with all these books because they're all digital." And they were in the process of redesigning that. And now one of the most interesting and challenging stories that we're looking at and that I'm following, because I find it so interesting, is what is happening to downtown office space heavy Washington, New York, some of these cities that have really got a core downtown. So that's I think a very big sort of post-COVID reimagining cities in a fundamental way. I think it was the Times the other day had a big story on that, very interesting. Is really, I'm sure that's going to be a major topic of conversation here because COVID has driven this. So from a kind of story perspective, that's a big one. An inspiring story, I really love the stories of how cities are trying to become more livable and just in the work that they're doing with public spaces, bike lanes, thinking through the kind of equation, again, really batted around by COVID. COVID has really messed this up. I mean, you just see people gathering in completely different ways, big challenge. But I think that's one. And I did love the story that this student, we had a student do this story on these electric buses I was mentioning here in DC, and it was done very cleverly on and off a bus, and it was shot, it was a video. So it was a lot of fun. And the experimentation that cities are doing. It's expensive in some cases not. But that's another place that I find really engaging.
Last question for you. What would you say is the story of the city of the future?
Reinvention.
Okay.
We are now moving with everything at a velocity that's just so incredible. Right? Whether it's a new piece of technology, that's, whether what's going to happen with, suddenly you blink your eyes and there's ChatGPT and we have to figure out what that means for our students. Where did that come from? Right? So where and how are people going to live? Where and how are they going to work? If they're working from home differently, how does that change the way we design both our homes and our cities and our public spaces? How are cities, which are gigantic creators of greenhouse gases, through buildings and transportation and waste and recycling and everything that we do, how are we going to rethink that? So I think the story of reinvention, the story of how do we engage people, right? 50 million people in Shanghai, 10 million people in New York, whatever that's going to be. And in this country, in the United States, and if you're from Texas, you know this, what do we do with cities that have not been built on anything remotely like a hub and spokes model, where it's entirely vehicular transportation that gets people around? Los Angeles is desperately trying to kind of build some light. Well, good luck. I mean, that's going about as well as the high-speed rail project in California. A lot of money, and each billion feels like a drop in the bucket. So this is going to require a huge amount of ingenuity, engineering, political will, which is where the storytelling comes in, because we're going to have to get the public on board with this stuff too. And that's really hard to do now. It is really, how many of you work in the public sector in some fashion? Okay, so good luck. You try to get out there and raise an idea and 27 people are tweeting that you're an idiot before you've even finished the sentence, right? How do you change public policy when the public is so easily hijacked? And if we're going to really dig into some of the fundamental and exciting change, I would say, all right, soon you're not going to be able to buy an incandescent light bulb on the shelf. There was a really fun story that I was reading just today about this. This guy was writing it. And because he talked about when he was growing up, I guess he's an older guy too, and was, in the 70s and 80s, it's like, Johnny, turn off the lights, save energy, turn off the lights. He says, actually, if you've got LED light bulbs, that doesn't matter anymore. Or certainly not so much, because it uses 1/10 of the energy. But light bulbs, like now gas stoves, become part of a culture war. And we're going to have to figure this out, because it's not just snowflakes who want to do this, and snowflakes don't do very well when it's 110 degrees outside.
Well, I feel like we could keep going forever, but we are just about out of time. I really appreciate all the work that you're doing. I encourage everyone to check out Planet Forward, the website. There are a lot of really great stories by students
if I can. So there's a story there about Kate Gallego, the mayor of Phoenix, trying to make Phoenix a heat-ready city. There's a great story that students did on the retrofitting of the Empire State Building, and what that took, and changing all those windows to make it an energy-efficient building. There are stories on transportation and food and all these kinds of things. And that's why when you asked me to be here, I was so excited to do it, because this topic is just one of the greatest stories of our time, and we are living it, which kind of makes it real.
Thank you so much, Frank. It was great talking with you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
All right, we're going to get a